So let's talk about tools for enhancing memory. Now, there's one tool that is absolutely clear works. And it's always worked, it works now, and it will work forever. And that's repetition. The more often that you perform something or that you recite something, the more likely you are to remember it in the future. And while that might seem obvious, it's worth thinking about what's happening when you repeat something. But when I say what's happening, I mean at the neural level. What's happening is that you're encouraging the firing of particular chains of neurons that reside in a particular circuit, right? So a particular sequence of neurons playing neuron A, B, C, D, played in that particular sequence over and over and over again. And with more repetitions, you get more strengthening of those nerve connections. Now, repetition works, but the problem for most people is that they either don't have the patience, they don't have the time, and sometimes they literally don't have the time because they've got a deadline on something that they're trying to remember and learn, or they simply would like to be able to remember things better in general, and remember them more quickly. This process of accelerating repetition-based learning so that your learning curve doesn't go from having to perform something 1,000 times and then gradually over time it's 1,750 times a day, 500 times a day, 300 times a day, and down to no repetitions, right? You can just perform that thing the first time and every time. Well, there is a way to shift that curve so that you can essentially establish stronger connections between the neurons that are involved in generating that memory or behavior more quickly. How do you do that? Well, in order to answer that, we have to look at the beautiful work of James McGaugh and Larry Cahill. James McGaugh and Larry Cahill did a number of experiments over several decades, really, based on a lot of animal literature, but mainly focused on humans, that really established what's required to get better at remembering things and to do so very quickly. I want to talk about one experiment that they did that was particularly important. We will provide a link to this paper. It's some years old now, but the results still hold up. In fact, the results establish an entire field of memory in neuroscience and psychology. What they did is they had human subjects come into the laboratory and to read a short paragraph of about 12 sentences. And the key thing is that some subjects read a paragraph that was pretty mundane. The content, the information within the paragraph was all related to the content of the previous sentence. So it was a cogent paragraph, right? It just wasn't meaningless scramble of words, but it described a kind of mundane set of circumstances. Maybe it would be a story about someone who walked into a room, sat down at a desk, wrote for a little bit, then got up and had lunch, just kind of mundane information, not very interesting. Another group of subjects read also a 12-sentence paragraph, but that paragraph included a subset of sentences that had a lot of emotionally intense language, or that had language that could evoke an emotionally intense response in the person reading it. So it might have talked about a car accident or a very intense surgery, but it also could be positive stuff. Things like a birthday party or a celebration of some other kind or a big sports win. So in other words, you have two conditions of this study. People either read a boring paragraph or they read a really emotionally laden paragraph. And again, the emotions could either be positive or negative emotions. Subjects left the laboratory, and sometime later they were called back to the laboratory. And I should say, at no point in the experiment did they know they were part of a memory experiment. Okay, they don't know why they were reading this paragraph. They came in either for class credit or to get paid. It's typically how these things are done on college campuses or elsewhere. They come back into the lab and they would get a pop quiz. They would be asked to recall the content of the paragraph that they had read previously. Now, as is probably expected, perhaps even obvious to you, the subjects that read the emotionally intense paragraph remembered far more of the content of that paragraph and were far more accurate in their remembering of that information. Now, that particular finding wasn't very novel. Many people had previously described how emotionally intense events are better remembered than non-emotionally intense events. In fact, way back in the 1600s, Francis Bacon, who's largely credited with developing the scientific method, said, quote, "Memory is assisted by anything that makes an impression on a powerful passion, inspiring fear, for example, or wonder, shame, or joy." Francis Bacon said that in 1620.